The Ship of Theseus problem explained with everyday objects. Imagine you have a favorite pair of shoes. Over time, the soles wear out, so you replace them. A few months later, the laces fray, so you change those too. After years of gradual repair, every part of the shoe has been replaced. Here's the question: is it still the same pair of shoes? This is a modern take on one of philosophy's oldest and most puzzling thought experiments, the Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is an ancient paradox that poses a simple yet profound question. If an object's components are replaced over time, is it still the same object? The story dates back to the ancient Greeks. According to legend, the hero Theseus sailed his ship into battle. Afterward, to honor his deeds, the people of Athens preserved his ship in a harbor. But as time passed, the wood on the ship began to rot. To keep it intact, the Athenians replaced each piece of wood, one by one, until no original piece remained. This led to a philosophical question: is it still Theseus's ship? On the surface, it seems like a simple question, but when we think about it deeply, it challenges our understanding of identity, continuity, and the nature of objects. And it's not just a philosophical problem, you can relate it to everyday objects and experiences. Let's bring the Ship of Theseus into the present day. Think of objects you use every day. Let's start with something simple, a broom. Imagine you've been using the same broom for a few years. Over time, the bristles wear out, so you replace the head of the broom. A few months later, the handle breaks, so you replace that too. You've now replaced both the head and the handle. Is it still the same broom? What if you kept the old parts, and over time, reassembled the original broom with the worn-out handle and frayed bristles? Would that be the original broom? Or is the broom you've been using all along the real one? This brings us to the heart of the Ship of Theseus problem. If we gradually replace the parts of an object, when does it stop being the original? And what happens when we have all the old parts to create a second object? Do we now have two versions of the same thing? Let's explore more objects. Take a car, for instance. Cars go through repairs and upgrades constantly. Over the years, parts like the tires, engine, and even the body panels might be replaced. Is it still the same car you drove off the lot, or has it become something entirely new? Or consider your smartphone. Let's say the screen cracks and you replace it. Later, the battery dies and you swap that out too. Then maybe the motherboard gets replaced. Is it still your original phone? These examples show that the Ship of Theseus problem is not just about ancient philosophy. It's about how we think of objects around us. Every time we repair or upgrade something, we're engaging with the same puzzle. Now that we've looked at a few everyday objects, let's dive deeper into why this is such a difficult problem to solve. At the core of the Ship of Theseus paradox is the concept of identity. What makes something itself over time? One way to think about it is in terms of physical components. If all the parts are replaced, you might argue it's not the same object because none of the original material remains. But others might say that it's still the same object because its function or purpose hasn't changed. The broom still sweeps, the car still drives, and the phone still works. In other words, the identity of an object could be tied to what it does, not what it's made of. Let's take this a step further. What about objects that have sentimental value? Imagine a favorite childhood toy. Over time, it gets worn out, so parts are replaced. Even if none of the original material is left, does the emotional attachment make it the same toy? The Ship of Theseus problem doesn't just apply to objects. It also raises fascinating questions about us, human beings. Our bodies are constantly changing. Cells die and are replaced, sometimes within days, sometimes over years. By the time we're adults, most of the cells in our bodies have been replaced multiple times. Does that mean we're no longer the same person we were years ago? From a physical standpoint, you could say we're like the ship, gradually replaced piece by piece. But from a psychological or emotional perspective, many people would say we remain the same person, because our memories, personality, and consciousness create continuity. Different philosophers have offered various takes on the Ship of Theseus paradox. Some argue that identity is fluid and can change over time, while others believe that identity is tied to an unchanging essence that remains, even if the parts are replaced. The philosopher Heraclitus famously said, "You cannot step into the same river twice." He meant that both the river and the person stepping into it are constantly changing, so there's no fixed identity. On the other hand, Aristotle suggested that objects have an underlying form or essence that defines them, regardless of the changing parts. So, why does any of this matter? The Ship of Theseus paradox isn't just a mental puzzle for philosophers. It has real-world implications for how we think about ownership, memory, and even law. For example, if every part of a historical building is restored and replaced over time, is it still the same historical site? If an athlete receives an organ transplant or a prosthetic limb, are they still the same person, physically speaking? The problem also matters in the world of technology. Think about digital identity. If your social media account gets hacked, passwords changed, and data replaced, is it still your account? The Ship of Theseus problem asks us to reconsider how we define the identity of objects, and even ourselves. Is identity about the physical components that make up an object, or is it something deeper, a continuity of function, purpose, or memory? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. As we navigate through life, constantly replacing parts of the things we own, and even parts of ourselves, the Ship of Theseus reminds us that the question of identity is not always clear-cut. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating philosophical discussions and everyday thought experiments.